Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Ang,
And I'm Cindy Kay.
and welcome to our podcast again, Superpower and Sidekick.
Where we team with spirit to live a life beyond our imagination. There's a topic that we've both been talking about that we thought would be good for one of these discussions. And when we learned about the topic, our teacher called it wandering spirits and false mental illness. In today's spiritual community that I am involved with, at least online and a few other places, it's generally called attachments and yeah, just attachments really for the most. And there's some broad strokes given to invisible entities that they might be putting a bunch of them into the wrong category. I think there's some miscategorizations going on, and maybe not enough words and enough terminology to be able to talk about it. But because we're talking in the invisible world, no matter what we talk about, I always want it to kind of be given that it's just the tip of an iceberg, because we are still in physical bodies and we still view and are conditioned to view ourselves mainly as physical beings, that the multidimensional realities are still we're just starting to come to understand them, and we've got a long, long ways to go. And for the most part, I would say most of us are bulls in a china shop and don't realize it. I know I've talked to other people in the spiritual community that talks like they know something that I've got different understandings on, because spiritual phenomenon is different and we all experience it differently. So the way that we describe it and the way that we perceive it can sometimes be we can be talking about the same thing, but if someone's coming from a fear-based ideology, they're going to talk about it a certain way. And if someone's coming from a love-based ideology, it's going to be talked about in another way.
So, how do you differentiate those two?
If it's fear, more than likely I'm not going to be in agreement with what's being said for myself, because of my own travels and a lot of these invisible entities that I have encountered. I have just grown at least for myself, a broader understanding and a deeper respect and a lot less fear. And I'm not saying that there's not malicious energies in the universe. Absolutely there are, and there are nefarious things that would love to use your own bad inner dialogue against you, and can and will pull the strings to do that. And that's just it. They can operate from what seems like behind a curtain, because they are in the invisible world. And if they aren't recognized and noticed, and we don't use our own conscious mind, they can come from our own unconscious conditioning and basically talk us into doing things that maybe we wouldn't do morally otherwise, or other kinds of things. Or, with possession, some people will act crazy, but they're not actually crazy. They're just not sovereign in that moment. They might be sharing with other nefarious entities that are using their own fear-based ideology between the brains to control them. Between the brains, between the ears, the brains between the ears.
Yeah, and so if you don't understand the invisible world and you're messing with, well, we know about black magic, voodoo, all
And not
that kind
all
of
of those
stuff,
are
right?
necessarily bad. Some of that has actually just had some propaganda against it.
Because
Uh,
just the word itself, voodoo, you think automatically it's bad, or black magic, right?
well, because it's had a whole lot of really crappy propaganda. And I'm not saying that there aren't stuff that people might do curses and things that are not, they're malicious, and I would not recommend ever doing anything like that. That's not what I'm not advocating harming other people ever. And but there's there's so much more to energy than just good or bad. It's not so black as white and white as the world would like to make it. Some of these energies, I believe, are just literally lost. And if they could find the door home, they probably would. A different way to frame this is that's why it's so important for us to be mindful in our life, to be in our conscious mind as much as possible rather than running from our unconscious and subconscious minds. And very often people don't deal with their own shadows, and it keeps their traumas, their experiences young in life, different things that have happened to them, run in a tape and keep them stories stuck in their minds and in their life. Without diving in to know our own shadows, some of these energies can attach on and keep that type of inner dialogue going and even get worse and worse and worse. And you do see it in some mental illnesses, but I don't think that's a mental illness the way that it's defined in the world today. And I do think, especially with suicides, there's entities that can go around and talk others into doing the same thing. I saw a episode of Medium once. I don't know if you remember the show. I think it was back in the 90s. I
Hmm.
love that show, of course,
Hmm.
because then I was in denial of who I am, but I still love the show. I'm no longer in denial of who I am. I might should go back and watch them again. But there was one episode where she was talking to someone in the front seat and there was someone in the back seat, but they were a soul. It wasn't a human being. It was a soul, and it was just a depiction, an actor playing a soul. But they were having a conversation, and this entity would come in and say, "Oh yeah, I've been talking to a bunch of different doctors around trying to see which one can listen to my suggestions." And it basically is revealed that he was the same one that talked Jack the Ripper into being Jack the Ripper in London, and that he had found a female doctor that he was able to influence, or it was able to. It wasn't an it or a she, or he or she, but that this entity was able to influence through their thought patterns. So bringing our minds into conscious reality keeps us from being able to be hijacked. That's one reason of knowing what you're doing when you're doing it and not just running on automatic. Using breathing techniques is a great way to do that, because it's the other body process that we can do by thinking, or it will run without us if we don't. A lot like our brains will do. We can direct and choose our conscious creation, or we can let the tape run and do it for us.
Okay,
So
but what about someone who has like a spell cast on them? Because I have experienced that with someone
you have.
that I know, and apparently her mother-in-law was the one that asked this, I guess, one of those black magic doctors to cast a spell, and I'm pretty sure it was they casted a spell because this girl was having these voices inside her head, like when she's cooking and she, has the knife cutting something, and the voice would tell her to
To cut
stab her
them.
children, to use the
Yes.
knife and stab her children and kill them. And
Yes.
this has happened like several times
That's a
when,
very real phenomenon, and
yeah,
I have experienced it myself. Yes.
yeah. So, how do you help someone in that situation?
In that situation, you've got to learn how to raise your frequency rather quickly.
Hmm.
And we have to change our thoughts. And also, just the recognition that something is thinking other than you stops that action to some extent, because that's the whole point. That's the reason I say bringing things into the conscious awareness, because when you know you're being misguided, that person can't keep lying to you. That entity can't keep, you're going to be onto it at that point. That's already going to change the dynamic of that communication. So it's step one is revealing it and saying, hey, this is here, this is in the background, this is running, and this isn't you speaking to yourself, because that's almost always the problem as we identify it and see it in first person and believe that it is ourself rather than realizing it is an actual energy coming from outside of ourselves. We are telepathic, we are multidimensional. If we are aware of it and recognize it and validate it or not, we are, and we can't not be.
Okay, so that's what happened with this gal that I knew, and that's kind of what I told her to do. And she recognizes that it's not her because there is no way she would take a knife and kill her children with it. So she knows that it's coming from, the invisible entity that's telling her all this. But so the fact that she recognizes it that it's not her, but then she still cannot
The
was
other
not able to like get this
did you
entity to
teach the
leave.
other thing I do at that point is I start teaching that person a lot of different energy techniques and things to use in meditation to truly, and I also I teach people how to dissolve cords and to become sovereign, where you turn on your light so bright that nothing other than that brightness can exist within you because you're emanating. uh, the reason I came to spirituality is a family type possession that had ruled me really from the time I was about 12, was whenever I first remembering it to start coming in and perturbing me from the background. I was not fully strong enough to 100% like take control and sovereignty of myself till almost 2006. So it was 7 years of energy work before I 100% fully got gained what I call sovereignty. And I had to literally, but I had to learn enough energy and get to the point where I could eclipse it out. And there was nothing that could be in me but me.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're not able to do that yourself, you can then have,
There are
call
people,
upon someone who can help you.
someone
And
like
that's
me who has
yeah.
gone through it. And because and I'm not the only one, there are other people, but we can help walk you through it. And the thing is a healer, a spiritual healer can clear someone. But if you keep talking in the same mental, you're going to open yourself up to the same kinds of things again. So you have to change habits at the same time. And so that's where I start teaching energy techniques, and I believe in mantra and mudra and some other different things. And if you're Christian based or a different religious base, we can move within those parameters. It's not necessarily, there's so many tools available. One tool might fit one person and one tool might fit another person, but where you start putting your brain waves and the patterns in your brain into a different mode of patterning. And you do it through repetition, and it does work, but it takes a minute and it takes diligence. But you've got to feed your brain something else.
Yeah. And if you're not able to clear it yourself, then at least have someone
Get
help
some
you
help.
because that's what we had to do. My mom and I had to fly there to see her, to personally see her. And we went into her house and we both sat there and, you know, did our technique
Yeah,
and it was really
powerful.
intimidating because I could sense the presence of that energy. And the moment that we tried to clear it out, I felt like this huge like pressure on my chest, like they were trying to
For myself,
suppress me.
I don't clear because they're automatically you're like putting in a battle. I eclipse. I put so much energy there. It's going to go, oh, I don't like this high energy, so I'm leaving really, really quickly. But it's basically making the choice to do that. But I do like to put it that way because when we say clear, because sometimes not all energies are nefarious, and that's part of what I wanted to make sure we brought in here, that it can actually be stuck in confusion. And you are a bright being of light, but say you came into this world with those latent abilities, but you haven't honed them yet. And but your soul is, you have learned how to help those beings. So they're just coming to you. And this also happened to me. And I had all of these beings coming to me for help, but I hadn't learned how to actually do it yet. But they knew I was going to learn how to do that. And sometimes that can be very heavy energy and cause depression because you don't realize it's like swimming in an ocean and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of people drowning, but they're holding on to you, pulling you under. So until you learn the light work that you have agreed to come in and learn to do on this life, sometimes they're just circling around you waiting.
I think you explained it very well. That was exactly what I was experiencing. Not so much clearing, but I was helping them to, yeah.
And they come in packs. It's like if one person maybe died of overdose, let's say, they're with a whole lot of others that passed from overdose, and for some reason through the trauma or some kind of an attachment to this realm, they didn't make it over to the other realm, and they like end up like in packs. And it's not on purpose, and there's not that malicious intent. There are absolutely entities with malicious intent,
Well,
but not.
yeah, if you're telling the person to kill their own children,
I had a bad experience with Prozac, and it opened up just the lower veil, and I heard stuff like that. And I do not hear that stuff without Prozac. It was only with Prozac that I heard it, felt it, and almost, I didn't do it but I was going to try to off myself because I didn't want any of those to control me and hurt anyone I loved. And that's just it. That whenever you see on this, I'm not going to say pro medication or not pro medication. For myself, for a psychic, it was not right for me. And doctors agreed with me afterwards, not right for me. I'm one of the people why there's a thing of can cause suicidal idealization, because for some of us it can open up the lower veil. And I find it interesting that it's usually children, but it happened to me 2 different times, 2 different medications. They were supposed to be different. The doctor told me they were not. Never again will I try it. Maybe I needed the second round just to go, oh, it's not just one. They all do that to me. Whatever it was, I didn't go through as much of a serious situation as I did the first time. But that's just it. And I think sometimes people in altered states, not necessarily, it can be medications, but it can be alcoholism. It can be it can be drugs from the street drugs. It can, some over the counter can even, I think, set off our balance in our nervous system enough that we can be controlled by other realms. They call alcohol spirit for a reason. It's called spirits for a reason.
so I think that's why when people don't understand what goes on in the invisible world and they try to, I don't know, act like they call in those spirits, it's
Or
very
mediums that or
dangerous.
mediums that talk about entities when they aren't, or attachments when they're not actually there. Where someone may just have a stuck rut in their brain and they just need to learn how to think better for themselves. Um, Sometimes I think that humans can use these concepts for nefarious reasons where they're not entirely accurate. I think we can help someone clear, absolutely, but I do think they have to make some decisions and do a certain amount of work themselves as well. And if a reader or a psychic tells you you don't need to adjust anything, that's a red flag to me.
Just what? Sorry?
That almost always the person that is being perturbed by something invisible needs to make some kind of change themselves,
Oh, I
so
see.
they're not so susceptible to that energy.
Ah,
So even though we might can go clear the situation for them, it's good that they learn how to do a certain amount of energy for themselves so they have their own protective aura. And I'm a oracle card in one of my friends' deck, and she asked me what was my medicine to write in the book, and I told her connection is our best protection. And I still believe that if you are doing a spiritual practice of some point, and it even, this still works to me, even agnostic, because if you can reach, if you look at it in scientific, in psychic or physic type situation, you can think of it as energy and just working to direct your brain to the highest frequency energy every day possible. Now, if you're more of a spiritually based person, then it's connecting to source energy. And some people can say God and goddess, and we can go on for days, the different names of your higher being to call in. But like I said, even if you don't believe in any of that, it can just be, I want to have the best day possible, and I can't do that low energy, so I'm going to go to my highest frequency. And so wherever you fall within that, but as long as we were working every day to raise our frequency and to stay high frequency, we are a lot less susceptible to the invisible world. And we're actually, energy is kinetic. So we are calling in and invoking more of those high vibrational entities as well. And when we're stuck in fear and worry, and that's the reason I really talk about fear-based teachings, because that's only half of the control. And the ones that are doing that know what you're calling in when you're in that fear-based. It's a part of the whole scam. So the answer is always the same, though, to any of the situations that we're talking about. It's still the same tools to adjust frequency and adjust antennas, so that way you're not calling in that lower frequency, or that you're just so connected that when they call in, they go back, because that's what they're there for in the first place.
And they don't bother you
At all.
at all.
Nowadays, I'll just I'll feel something in my toe, and I'll feel something in the top of my head at the same time. I'm like, oh. But we really can bring heaven to earth by channeling that frequency. And it also opens up that portal. If there is any of that energy around that needs help, you're not clearing, you're helping. It's different. That's why it's love-based instead of fear-based. That's the reason I don't look at these, oh, you need your house cleared. No, you need to attune your antenna to a higher frequency. I look at it from a different frame of, and I can definitely help someone in the interim. But it's the same thing. I worked for Wild Oats in the supplement department, and I would tell people supplementation are not meant to replace foods. They are there to supplement until you can figure out your diet and adjust it accordingly. And it's kind of the same concept. If I use that as an analogy, I can help you get there for the moment, but you're going to have to make some adjustments to be able to keep it to that. And in my own practice, and whenever I teach others, and whenever I help others, and whenever I give readings, a lot of it is giving them techniques and tactics and tools it's really about changing the divots in the brain. You've thought that one thought, you've had that same story for 70 years, and you can't get out of that same track. It's just like your record is stuck on one line, and it will never go to the next line. That we can fill those in and move on to new thoughts and to new ways of doing things and calling new things in, because we have a different quality and frequency of thought. So tending our garden in this day and age right now, because I've never seen so many, it's 2:22 on my clock, I just saw. In this day and age right now, there is so much of the low frequency cult tactics, conditioning out in the world right now, that to be able to be as free thinking as possible, and there's no way to do it at all currently, but to the best of our ability, is we need to be in some way or another diligently doing it every day, so that way we can change the tracks of our mind, so we don't get stuck in our old story. And whenever we do that, we cannot be controlled by physical or non-physical beings anymore. That control only happens when we do not have control of our own consciousness. That's why it's important to learn how to be mindful and to be home when you're home in your body. Disassociation is like a drug when it comes to the invisible world. If you're disassociated, you can be controlled.
That's why I like to unplug from my phone every now and then and just try to connect and not have all that external chaos that's,
And everybody else's frequency, it doesn't have to be
right.
entities. It can literally just, when I went to Auschwitz, I thought that there would be a lot of entities left over, and there were not. I did not feel that the victims were stuck as in wandering spirits on Auschwitz. That's not what I felt at all. I did feel that all the trauma and chaos was so real, and the scar and the smell and the vibration of it was all still very, very, very there. But the only entities that I came across were the Germans that ran it. They were the ones that were stuck. So, so often it's not what we think about, but that energy of that trauma still needs to be cleared. That's still heavy energy. That's still, so it doesn't, it can be frequency and not have anything to do with entities as well. And you could just put it in that terms, and you can still do the same work and be able to take care of what you need to take care of. It's not about how we perceive it and what we call it, because always it's about redirecting our antenna and changing our story so we aren't stuck in those same brain waves that we were stuck in when we were 14. If you have a different quality of thoughts, your life will change, and you actually get the spiritual support to change your life comes because you're thinking a higher frequency thought. And if you're thinking a lower frequency thought, they'll come help you do mayhem too. Whatever we choose, we have way more choice than what we realize. But because of conditioning and brainwashing, I'm sure I'm still talking just the tip of the icebergs. Even in, I've been working on it for many, many, many years, and I know that I'm not there, not where I would like to be on it. But I do know I'm sovereign, and I do know how to stay sovereign. I worked at that.
And so if someone has like a family member who's in that situation where they're, being affected by a lower frequency or entity and they get, go to the psychiatrist, etc., and then they get put away in a psychiatric ward or and nothing is
Sometimes
being healed.
there are times there is nothing you can do. The friend that you were able to assist was in the right enough of her own mind to ask for assistance and to be able to articulate that she knew it was something outside of herself. If they actually identify as that other entity, there's not much you can do. And it feels like your hands are tied. It's a pretty awful feeling to witness. I've been through it recently. But there's free will. And even in somehow or another, you've agreed for that to happen by having certain thoughts and opening certain doors, and it's there. Maybe doing drugs in a place that you shouldn't do drugs, or there's a lot of places where massacres happened, especially in the Southwest where I live. There was a lot of massacres that happened in this area. And what if you're doing meth or fentanyl, whatever it is? Now, I don't know what all they're doing these days because I'm out of that world, but you're doing those kinds of things at the same kind of places that this happened, for instance.
Then you're more susceptible.
More susceptible, and it's torture for the family. There's not much that can be done because you made choices. So there was your free will invited. We realize if we realize it or not, we can invite things in.
So is that why these mass shootings occur? I don't know if we want to address that in this podcast, but
I don't know if I want to go completely down that rabbit hole, but
yeah.
I would say that there's a good chance that some of what we're talking about is at play. I've had theories over the year. I mean, I wanted to go back into the mental hospitals and go, "You're not crazy. You're not crazy. You're not crazy. Come here. Let me teach you energy. You'll be okay." And there is real mental illness as well, and there is trauma that they might not come out of it in this lifetime. And I don't think we should hate that person. That's not at all what I'm here to, I think no matter what, compassion and empathy is called for in all the different situations.
I mean,
I
that is considered real mental illness, trauma and whatnot. But what we're talking about more is like being possessed, multiple personalities, right? Could that be
and
it?
and playing with things you shouldn't play with and opening doors that you shouldn't play. There is that happening. And I do. I'm a spirit medium, but I still understand why there's a warning about a Ouija board. I would not do mediumship. I was in resistance for 20 years until finally spirit sat me down and said, you will never, ever, ever have to invoke an energy that has crossed over. Because I realized that it was because I have so much reverence that I didn't want to invoke anything but high frequency, angelic helpers, things like that. I did not want to call in anything that had crossed over. But what I figured out was those ancestors and those beings are around their loved ones, and they want to be heard so bad because they see healing that could happen if they were heard. And once I realized that they're just looking for an interpreter, and because I am so telepathic, I can serve that purpose. I've actually seen it being huge, huge, huge form of healing. So I have a complete different perspective on it now. But I had to know from my own integrity and my own ethics that I was not going to call in somebody's son that crossed over because they want to hear from them so bad. But what I learned is almost always that son's one reason they want to hear from it is because that son wants to tell them something, and then I'm good. But I have to let people know I can only interpret whoever's here, whoever steps forward, and I don't ask anybody to step forward. It is free will basis. Because I do think people can invoke energy and not know what the heck they're doing, and it might not be the best idea.
Exactly. It could be very dangerous because you don't know what you're dealing with.
Something controversial, sage. I have a bundle right here. I love it. I had a Lakota person teach me this. I think I was 22, 23 years old. I went to in Ruidoso, there was a big, large spiritual community, and they had a Lakota elder come in, and they did a sweat lodge. And anyway, I was very, very curious. I didn't know I was going to be working in this field, but they knew. I remember some of them knew I was psychic, and I didn't even figure it out yet. I had several people told me before I realized it. But anyway, so I was taught by an elder, but for sometimes I think layperson just going up and picking up sage to clear their house can actually perturb stuff that they don't know how to deal with. And it's better to leave sleeping dogs lie. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but I do think sometimes it's good to not just appropriate and to actually learn it from the source if you are going to use a modality, a healing modality. And I, even though I will sage, which is very Native American, but I was taught and I was shown, and it was very young. And I feel like I have that permission now to do that. And there might be another Lakota person that would totally say, nope. And no matter what, I want to be respectful of all cultures and their beliefs, and not just hijack them and use them for my own purpose. But I respect them deeply. And I do think that's another way right there that you can get help for some of the things that, say we're not always available, or that that person may not resonate with our energy. We might not be the right people. A native elder sometimes is the perfect person to go to because they are still, a lot of them still understand the shamanic ways. And I actually believe that one of the problems, the reason why there is way more problems in society, and especially Western society and colonialistic societies, is that the shamans were all massacred or burnt at the stake or hung, and because they did not want us to believe in the spiritual world. They didn't want to believe us to be able to go to our own source. We needed a go-between. That was part of the trick and the cult that they were bringing in. And I think that's one reason we have as much as we have. I think in shamanic type societies, it doesn't exist like this, because there's a better understanding and a knowledge. And then when someone does act like that, out like that, people can oh, there's a problem here, and they end up getting to the right people. So, and I do think that's one reason we're having a resurgence of people coming back into those ancient ways of acknowledging the spiritual world, and that we're not just dealing with our physicality, that we are dealing with the spirit world as well, and humans who are talented and able to cross the bridge of both, and they're out there. One of my yoga teachers found out that I'm dyslexic, and she said, she went off for a good 30 minutes to an hour. Cinda, if you had been raised in a native community, they would have taken you out right away and started training you how to be a shaman. I said that, and my seven just went off. And that was a sign for them to know. So I think we've lost a lot in translation.
Because
You
it's
know,
so fear-based, because it's something different. It's something they don't understand.
and thank you for bringing back up the fear base. People who are afraid of ghosts, you're going to call in nefarious ghosts. That's how you do it, is by being, that's how you open the door to one.
That would be me. I used to be so scared of ghosts. Now, not so
And did they
much.
perturb you when you were scared of them?
Did they what?
Perturb you? They'll mess with you.
No, but I was more of not wanting to see them.
Okay. Did you naturally see them? Is that why?
No, but I could sense
Okay.
an
You
energy.
were clairsentient, so you knew they were there and you were afraid of seeing them.
Yes.
But why were you afraid of that energy?
I don't know. I just didn't want to see them. Like if I was sitting in a room by myself and I felt them, I would not want to see them in my room.
Well, no, because we were totally raised in completely different cultures. Your
Uh-huh.
culture does recognize ancestor energy and souls that have crossed out. You Vietnamese are way more knowledgeable about that there's an invisible spiritual world than what Americans are.
Yeah.
We come from two different worlds within that.
Hmm.
I know in the American home, it was so fear based that they don't know what to do. And any entity is a reason to be feared. And I live in what they call a ghost town, and there are some strong spirits in this town. And I've seen people that apparently are not supposed to be here because they get run off like that. And then other people that you wouldn't think are going to be able to fit in, that end up, they're supposed to be in this town. And I know it's all chose by the ghosts of Madrid, but I know them to not be nefarious. I know them to be of the helpful sort, ancestral type energy, and it's ancient. It goes back to the Tiwa Indians long before the Kiwa, long before the Spaniards came in here, or Western civilization. So there's been a community here because it was turquoise mine, and they found that turquoise in Chaco Canyon. So that was long before the Spanish conquistadors. And it's, I've watched them like weed people out, that they don't have a high enough compassion for humanity, so they're not going to get to stay in this town. Just for an instance. But the more that we do recognize that there's a spiritual, I was working on something that I wanted to balance and harmonize within my relationship, and it was, I was on my high horse. No, I decided I was putting my stake in the ground, and it was something important for me to fight for. And my grandma came to help, and the images that I got, the understandings that I had, what she wasn't able to do in her own life, she was there to support me, to help me to overcome that completely. And I could tell by the images that were coming, and some of the understandings that I came in. And it took me a minute to realize it was her, but she was, and we are missing that in the Western world. Her husband, they considered him to be mentally ill. He was an alcoholic. He got out of a mental hospital and he tried to kill the whole family. She ended up in the hospital herself for like 3 months from how bad he beat her. And I found his grave 4 years. It was weird. I was watching another show about medium on ABC. It was a different medium. I can't remember the name of this one. And they actually mentioned Mrs. Strong, and her name when she was married to him was Mrs. Strong. His last name was Marshall. His name was Marshall Bird Strong. Bird. Yeah. And, but he died that night. They say it was suicide. I'm pretty sure someone protected themselves, but that's not here or there to this story. I found it, and it's really close to the sacred place that I go, that I've had visions and I've seen different stuff for. I've had so many experience out there. It's not crazy. It's just crazy. I mean, and it's on the way there. So it's like perfect drive to there and then on to the other thing. So we stopped so I could pay. I don't think anyone had ever really prayed for my grandfather because it had happened in such a violent manner. And I just wanted to go pray for her soul because no matter what, something went off or else, and there needs to be compassion to the whole situation, to everyone that went through it. And that morning when I went and jumped in the shower, I had a whole scenario download. Now, could it be Delta Dawn delusional? Yes, but I'm pretty sure I was channeling, and it was channeling information. And I got that in our family history that we had shamanic people that knew what they were doing with the invisible world, and they were some of the first people that were killed in the Inquisition, and that all the souls that were coming to them for help kept coming down the family line, and that's why there is so much family possession within my family. That, and I got that, and that I was the first person that came back and picked that back up on what it, and they were coming to him, but he was a drinker, and he didn't know at all how to deal with it. So I think colonization in and of itself, when Rome took over Christianity, and because Rome didn't die, it just morphed, and it was bloody and it was violent and it went all over this planet, and it cut everybody off by their roots, all the indigenous tribes, including, we're talking back to Celtic. So even the Western man itself was cut off from their roots. So it started in their own homes, and then it went all the way around the world. And by cutting off those wisdom keepers that understood that we are multidimensional, that we're not just physicality, we also lost all of our teachings and understanding in that we can help in other ways, that we, I think there's a lot of misdiagnosis because there is nothing about multidimensional energies within mental health at all, or physical. And I think it can go both ways too. So I think it can affect physically as well as mentally. But there's also a huge spiritual movement going on right now. And as I still, because I was thinking about it, someone said they were agnostic yesterday, and I can totally put it into physics and into science and go, Tesla said that until we recognize that we're frequency as well as physical, we're not going to have the answers. He had a much better quote for that, and I didn't come out with the quote right, but that was essentially what it meant. And the more that we do recognize that we are wavelengths, that we, I don't know if you've ever been around a dead person, but they do not emit light. You emit light. I can see it. Go look at a dead person. Go to the casket next time they have a viewing and look at your loved one who passed away and see if they're emitting light. And that light doesn't cease to exist when the body's no longer animated.
Okay, I know that you said once that if we wanted to elevate our abilities, that we just ask spirit to help us, whether we want to see things more, hear things more, have
If
a
you want to
certain
work on a
knowing.
certain clair, I want
Yeah,
to only work on my clairaudience for a while. Give everything to me in the ears for a
yeah.
little while.
I don't want to see anything.
They'll start telling you all kind. Oh man, you'll start hearing all kinds of stuff.
Okay, so like for me, I have
And I
this.
go to source to ask these things, by the way.
Right. But so how do you help someone get over a certain fear of, like for me, seeing an invisible being, for example?
You can tell your spirit guides you never want to see them and you're never going to have to see them. I believe.
Mm.
I really do think that they want to help us enough that they even understand our idiosyncrasies. I have never been forced. It has always come through free will. I've always been asked. I get asked before something happens 90% of the time, and I don't realize I'm being asked until after whatever happens. And I went, ah, they asked me. And I get asked about everything. Am I willing to? And to me, it's like, well, if you're asking me, yes, I'm willing. I do have, if you're coming in that source frequency, the one I do truly trust and has helped me to do amazing things on this planet and in this life. And I've lived a life way beyond my imaginations and anything I dreamt that I thought I could do. And I don't think I'm even near done yet. And if they're going to ask me, I'm going to go, yes. What do you want me to do? But if I have a low frequency thought doing that, I don't look at it the same. If I had a thought like your friend was, I'm going to turn around and put a magnifying glass and a whole bunch of light on it. I'm not going to just let it run in my tape. But high frequency when it will teach me spiritual because I've asked to be taught because I know there's more. I got on my knees because I knew there was more and I asked for help and they showed me there's so much more. And but a lot of times with the direction they want me to come, they're going to repeat. It's going to be like on repeat until I do it. And I see people who are just really awakening to this and be able to use this and it drives them crazy. And I'm like, then just do it. Because almost always it's for me, it started out with packing my bags. Who cares if you don't get the call to go somewhere? You've just got a bag packed. It's not going to hurt anything. Why would you argue with it? But I started out arguing with that until I went to 65 international trips, and half of them I didn't know about until minutes before I left for them. So when I started, okay, oh, they're telling me to pack a bag, I'm going to pack a bag. Last big trip I went, I didn't know I was going to go on 2 different tickets, so I wasn't going to be able to take checked luggage. I could only take a carry-on. And because I was getting messages for 3 months before that trip happened, I had everything down to a T that I needed. And I ended up going to like 67 different countries. It was crazy what all happened. But I was getting it from spirit that I needed to put certain things in a bag and that I was going to go do something. And I argued with it. It didn't, everybody, it all happened. And I argued with it, but I still did it. So I'm lucky for that. So how do you discern between the voices in your head? Who is you? Who is source? Who is just in the chaos that got left behind? And how do we discern all of those? And we discern them through frequency and through quality of thought. We have to analyze the quality of our thought. Is it working in our favor or is it working against us? Who have we aligned with? And if you're beating yourself up, you have not aligned with source because source is going to help you. It is not going to hurt you. But if you are having the kind of dialogue in your head where you're hurting yourself, you're probably not aligning with the highest frequency or working to.
Well, hurting yourself and hurting others too, not
Mm-hmm.
just yourself.
And that people who do not become mindful to their conditioning, that to me is what actual evil is, because then the conditioning can take over. And that is where mass shootings have happened and other things. I find it very dangerous. That's why I practice to be mindful. I practice on being home when I'm in my body, being here, and being in the highest frequency. I realize that I emit light. So I am working to light up my light bulb and, find my little plug and light it up.
Well, because it's kind of like I envision like you're a beacon of light, and everywhere you go, you're helping someone else light their light, and then slowly, slowly, everything is lit up.
And
Everybody is lit up and in a higher frequency.
a lot of times when I'm teaching this to people that maybe are being perturbed because they're light beings that haven't come into the actual knowledge of how to do it yet, is, hey, we're a lighthouse and they're all being called in, or we are that lifeguard. And so they're all swimming to us for that help. So you've got to really train and work to know how to stay on top of that water and not be pulled under. And that's, I think, I think that's perfect. And we're getting there. We're hitting it. We're nailing it. It's so important. So many people are entering the path without realizing that that's why we have to deal with our shadow, that we cannot just spiritually bypass and make everything perfect. We have to come into union with our emotions because our emotions were hijacked for conditioning. And emotions aren't bad. I said something on Facebook about dealing with anger, that the anger that comes with healing, because you realize you were being used by someone who didn't actually love you or whatever it might be. And when you come out of victimization and you start owning, you become sovereign, like what we're talking about here, because it happens in the visible as well as the invisible. And people were trying to gaslight me. Oh, well, you just don't focus on the negative. You don't. It's like, if you are in anger in that moment, if you go into denial, you are either suppressing, repressing, or bypassing, or both, all the above. And then it gets shoved into the unconscious. And when it's in the unconscious, that's when nefarious energies can use that against you. So we have to actually come into union and harmony with our emotions. If you feel anger, it's because somebody crossed a boundary and you need to set a boundary. You need to speak up for yourself. If you feel sadness, then maybe it's time to grieve. There's something, you lost something you love, and it's okay to grieve, because if we're attached, we're going to get attached. It's better to let go, and whatever you need to do to process, to do that, but not by suppressing or repressing or pretending that it's not there. It's at that point you have to own it, or else you're going to get stuck on that wave the rest of your life. When you own it, then it moves on and it transforms into joy. But if you try to I'm not angry. I'm not a spiritual person if I'm angry. Ooh, that stuff's going to start working from the background.
Yep,
I think some
guilty.
I think some of those guys out there that are talking about polyamory in the spiritual world have so many attachments around that. Okay, that's a whole nother story. But it's true, and it's going on out there. And that's another thing to touch on. When you sleep with another person, you are sleeping with everything that is attached to them as well. And we don't think spiritually about what we do sometimes,
Yeah, because when you're in that moment with them, you're sharing energies, right?
in a very, very, very intimate way. And they can absolutely be passed in that way. That we need to be discerning on our sexual partners, I believe. I'm all for, the 60s and free love and all that, but there might be some repercussions. And I'm not against polyamorous. That's not what I'm saying at all. I use that as an example because there is a certain person in the genre right now that's going on, and it just fits that. I'm not, I want to clarify that I am not at all against polyamorous relationships. I think there are people that can handle it very maturely, and it's a viable option if that fits you. And I'm not in any judgment at all. I can barely deal with the one. So maybe I'm not spiritually evolved enough.
Right.
But that in and of itself doesn't, I want to clarify that does not cause attachments. That is not what I'm talking about here at all. But if you are not mindful and you're just sleeping with you could end up with all kinds of attachments, I do think. there are so many, we need to work towards having the highest vibing life we can. And whatever it is that does that for you, and only we can find that, I can offer all kinds of ideas. And if they resonate for you, then I would definitely start turning them into tools. And I do a spiritual, I work at being spiritually connected to source every single day. I don't think I've missed it in 30 years. But I came because I wanted to stop a voice in my head I didn't want to ever hear again. And I have not heard it in many years. So it worked. I think because of the trauma that I went through and some of the other things, like I was talking about, family trauma, generational trauma, it took me a minute to find my sovereignty. It took me a minute to find my voice in that sea of voices. But I did. And I think everybody can. I have met with people that just by looking at them, because I can go through that Akashic records and I can go through that chaos and turmoil and go to their soul. And Summer brought over a young friend that was going through it. And we just had a moment where we were looking at each other and all of a sudden he saw who he was within all that sea. And he no longer identified as those negative voices in his head anymore. He thought he was an evil person when he walked in. He left knowing he wasn't evil, that wasn't even his voice that he was hearing. And I did it just by looking at him in the eye. And we had a spiritual phenomena and he saw it. I didn't have to say a word. He saw it. We didn't see him for several years and we saw him May Day last year. And he was so bright. And he doesn't, I don't think he thinks he's evil anymore. So it worked.
So was it because he had a that connection with you in that moment that
Yeah.
allowed him to see himself?
Yeah.
Ah.
I was able to reflect it. I was able to shine my light so bright he saw his own light. I've been able to walk through that corridor of voices to find myself.
And that's why it's so important to work on your shadows.
It's so important to work on it. Shadow work, it's more important than our light work. We can't do our light work without doing our shadow work. We have to know ourselves. We cannot sit on the floor if we don't know ourselves. If you know yourself, you're not going to think you're above somebody else. I don't care how talented you are. You could be the most talented person in the world and you're still going to see yourself as part of humanity if you've done your shadow work. And that's how we stop cult leaders in this world. Because I guarantee you there's not a cult person in the world that did their shadow work. Leader in the world, they need to do their shadow work. That's what they're missing. It humbles us. And the thing is, not just the invisible world can't use it against us, but the human world can't get us with it either. So we're not going to be manipulated by a narcissist that wants us, we want them to love us so bad, that victims always have that people pleasing where we become someone we're not, so that person will love us. If you know yourself, you're not going to do that. And if you know that it's not about, you don't go in and say, oh, I've got the shadow, I have to fix it. No, it's going in going, I'm human and I've made that mistake and I might make that mistake again. So I'm going to sit here on the floor and know that I'm human. And when I'm sitting on the floor, no one can come over and push me over. And that is, I'm going to notice if I have a pop. I am so on top of my thoughts now that whenever I have that negative thought, I'm going, who's here? Nope, we're not listening to you. I've weeded my garden. I notice the weeds. One of the things I tell people is you need to go through and find all your NOs because you've got so many NOs in your way, you can't find your KNOWs.
Okay, you have to explain that to me. NO as in no?
As in no. We accept things in our life that does not feel good and we end up in uncomfortable situations because of disassociation and past trauma that we don't speak up for ourselves. And we take on things that aren't ours and we take on responsibilities that aren't ours. We get villainized for things that we had nothing to do with. And we got to give the no fucks. We got to actually get to know. But most people I see have so many of the no's running around in chaos, they can't find their no's. KNOW. I know for me. I know what I like. Not what this person wants me to like, not what this person wants. So I'm doing that so that way this person likes me. That's what most people do. They don't even know what they like and what they don't like. You've got to find all your NOs to be able to find your KNOWs. And people that are lost in chaos and cannot make a decision, they've taken on a lot of stuff that is not theirs.
And I agree that it's not about fixing the the darkness or the it's about recognizing it. And the moment that you recognize it is when that part of you starts to heal.
Well, perfectionism was actually a tactic to control us. And so we decided to deny our shadow and hide it so we could project a perfect image. In the 70s, if you said any of what was going on in your family outside, oh my gosh, what a sin. We're saying the quiet things openly now. And things are not being able to hide because we're not living in a perfect society. Because I'm sorry, it's baloney in the first place. We're humans, and it's people are walking around half a person because they're denying their shadow. I'm not angry. I'm spiritual. I'm going to shove that anger down. But they're not an integrated whole being when they're doing that, and their unconscious is going to rule their life, and they're not going to be very happy. By accepting that we're not going to be perfect, that we are going to come through like nature because we're a part of nature, and she tends to be pretty messy, but it ends up being perfect in the long run. We no longer, we cease being, we don't look for the other person to complete us when we do that. This is the biggest healer for codependency, is when you see your shadow and you accept that as part of yourself, you're no longer half a person trying to get someone to complete you. You got your whole yin yang now, and it's all working together. It's like we got to make friends with our black horse and our white horse and put a halter on both of them so it can take our chariot forward. I just used the chariot card. But that's the meaning of it, is doing the shadow work so that way it works with you instead of against you.
Yeah. Good point. And that's a good place to stop.
As I say, I felt that one. That was
Yes.
it. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for joining us and hope to see you next time.
And I want to keep this interactive. You can find me at syndicate.com. On all the social medias, I'm Syndicate333 on Instagram, Syndicate Campbell on Facebook, and I do private sessions.
Right. Ciao.